The night wrapped the rural highway in a heavy silence broken only by the low hum of Michael Carter's black SUV slicing through the darkness. At 38, Michael was the CEO of Nexus Innovations, a tech startup on the cusp of revolutionizing artificial intelligence. But tonight, he wasn't the polished executive navigating boardroom battles. He was a single dad, stealing a rare weekend with his 6-year-old daughter Emma, who slept soundly in the back seat, her stuffed bunny clutched tightly. The dashboard clock glowed 9:47 p.m., and the road stretched endlessly ahead, flanked by shadowed trees and the occasional flicker of a distant farmhouse. Michael's mind drifted to the pressures waiting back in Silicon Valley. His company's upcoming AI platform launch was make or break, and the weight of it pressed against his chest. He glanced at Emma in the rearview mirror, her small face softened by sleep, her curls spilling over the car seat. 3 years ago, when his wife Sarah died in a car accident, Emma became his world. Every late night, every high-stakes deal, it was all for her. A sudden burst of orange snapped him back to the present, ahead. On the highway's shoulder, a car was ablaze, flames clawing at the night sky. Thick black smoke curled upward, and the air carried the sharp sting of burning rubber. Michael's pulse quickened. He eased the SUV to a stop. His eyes locked on the inferno. The car, an older sedan, was nearly consumed. Its hood, a molten ruin. "Emma, stay here," he whispered. Though she didn't stir, he grabbed his phone and dialed 911, stepping out into the chilly air. The operator's voice was calm, professional, but Michael's focus was elsewhere. Through the smoke, he saw something, a shadow moving inside the car. Someone was trapped. "There's a car on fire. Highway 17, mile marker 42, he said, his voice tight. "Someone's inside. Hurry." The operator urged him to stay back, but Michael's instincts screamed louder. He couldn't wait. The heat was suffocating as he approached, waves of it rolling off the car. The stench of gasoline and charred metal burned his throat, and the flames roared, drowning out the distant wail of sirens. He peered through the driver's side window, and his heart stopped. A woman was slumped in the front seat, her wrists bound by heavy chains looped through the steering wheel. Her dark hair was matted with soot, her face pale but her eyes wide. Desperate met his. She was alive. "Hold on!" Michael shouted, his voice nearly lost in the fire's roar. The flames were spreading, licking at the dashboard inches from her. He yanked the door handle, but it was locked. Panic surged, but he forced it down. He scanned the ground, spotting a jagged rock in the ditch. He grabbed it and smashed the passenger side window glass, exploding inward. The heat blasted his face, singeing his eyebrows, but he reached through, fumbling for the lock. His fingers burned against the scalding metal, but he popped the door open. The chains were padlocked, and there was no time to search for a key. Michael's eyes darted to the trunk where the fire hadn't yet reached. He sprinted to the back, his lungs burning from the smoke. The trunk was unlocked, and inside, among rags and scattered tools, he found a rusty crowbar. It wasn't ideal, but it was something. He raced back, wedging the crowbar between the chains and the steering wheel. His muscles strained, sweat dripping into his eyes as he pried with everything he had. The fire was closer now, the heat unbearable. "Come on," he growled, his voice raw. With a final desperate heave, the chain snapped. The woman collapsed forward, coughing violently. Michael pulled her free, dragging her to the grass, just as the car erupted in a deafening explosion. Shrapnel rained down, and he shielded her with his body, his heart hammering. Sirens wailed closer, red and blue lights cutting through the smoke. Michael knelt beside the woman, checking her pulse. It was faint but steady. Her face was streaked with ash, her clothes torn and singed, but she was breathing. Her eyes fluttered open, and for a moment she stared at him, her gaze a mix of fear and gratitude. "You're okay?" Michael said, his voice trembling. "Help's coming." She tried to speak, but only a rasping cough escaped. Paramedics swarmed the scene, their voices sharp and urgent as they loaded her onto a stretcher. Michael stepped back, his hands shaking, his burned fingers throbbing. Emma was awake now, standing by the SUV, her eyes wide as she clutched her bunny. "Daddy, is she gonna be okay?" she asked, her voice small. Michael forced a smile, though his mind was a storm of questions. "Yes, sweetheart, she's gonna be fine." But as the ambulance doors closed, a chill settled over him. Who was this woman? Why was she chained in that car? And what kind of monster would leave her to die? The police arrived, taking his statement, but their questions only deepened the mystery. The car was stolen, its plates untraceable. The chains were custom, not something you'd find in a hardware store. This wasn't random, it was deliberate. The hospital's fluorescent lights buzzed faintly. their cold glow casting long shadows across the waiting room's linoleum floor. Michael Carter sat in a stiff plastic chair, his bandaged hand resting on his knee, the burned skin beneath the gauze pulsing with a dull, persistent sting. His dark hair was disheveled, still flecked with ash from the fire, and his usually sharp blue eyes were heavy with exhaustion. At 38, Michael was the CEO of Nexus Innovations, a Silicon Valley tech startup poised to redefine artificial intelligence. But tonight, the weight of boardroom battles and investor expectations felt distant, replaced by the raw adrenaline of the night's events. Beside him, his 6-year-old daughter Emma was curled up in the neighboring chair, her small body tucked into a ball. Her head rested on his lap, her curls spilling over his thigh. Her stuffed bunny, a worn, floppy-eared relic named Mr. Flops, clutched tightly under her chin. Her soft snores were a fragile tether to normalcy in the sterile chaos of the hospital. It was well past midnight, and exhaustion clawed at Michael, dragging at his limbs and clouding his thoughts. But he couldn't leave, not until he knew the woman he'd pulled from that burning car was safe. The waiting room was a limbo of muted sounds, the low hum of a vending machine, the occasional murmur of nurses at the desk, the rhythmic tapping of his own foot against the floor. His mind replayed the night in vivid, relentless detail, the orange glow of the flames, the suffocating heat, the woman's terrified eyes locked on his through the smoke. He'd acted on instinct, smashing the car window, prying the chains loose, dragging her to safety just before the explosion. But now in the quiet, questions gnawed at him. Who was she? Why was she chained in that car? And what kind of monster would leave her to die? A doctor approached, her white coat crisp despite the late hour, a clipboard tucked under her arm. Her name tag read Dr. Elena Martinez, and her expression was calm but measured, the kind of professional reassurance that masked deeper concern. Mr. Carter, she said, her voice cutting through the fog of his thoughts. She's stable. Severe smoke inhalation, second-degree burns on her arms and back, and significant dehydration, but she's going to pull through. You got her out just in time. Michael exhaled, a knot of tension loosening in his chest. The relief was sharp, almost painful, like a breath held too long. Can I see her? He asked, his voice rough from the smoke he'd inhaled. Dr. Martinez hesitated, glancing at her clipboard. She's disoriented. She doesn't remember her name or how she ended up in that car. Her memory is fragmented, likely from trauma or shock. But she's been asking for the man who saved her. She's insistent about it. Michael's gaze flicked to Emma, who stirred at the sound of his voice, rubbing her eyes with a small fist. Her bunny slipped to the floor, and he bent to retrieve it, the movement sending a fresh wave of pain through his burned hand. He didn't want to drag Emma into this, to expose her to the raw edges of whatever this woman had endured. But leaving her alone in the waiting room even for a moment wasn't an option. The hospital was safe, but the night's events had left him on edge, hyper-aware of every shadow. Come on, kiddo, he said softly, lifting Emma into his arms. She was heavier than she used to be, her lanky limbs spilling over his hold, but she nestled against his shoulder, her warmth grounding him. The woman's room was down a quiet corridor, the air thick with the scent of antiseptic and the faint tang of bleach. The door was ajar, and the steady beep of a heart monitor punctuated the silence, a metronome of survival. Michael stepped inside Emma's weight, a steady presence in his arms. The woman lay in the hospital bed, an oxygen mask fogged with her shallow breaths, her dark hair fanned across the pillow. Her skin was pale, streaked with fading soot, and her arms were wrapped in gauze. But her eyes, deep brown, almost black, were alert, scanning the room with a mix of fear and confusion. When they landed on Michael, her shoulders relaxed, a subtle shift that spoke of recognition, maybe even trust. Hey, Michael said, keeping his voice low as if a louder tone might shatter the fragile moment. He set Emma down and she clung to his leg, her wide eyes fixed on the woman. How are you feeling? The woman reached for the oxygen mask, her movements slow and deliberate, and pulled it down to her chin. Her voice was hoarse, raw from the smoke, but there was a quiet strength in it. Like I was roasted alive, she said, a faint wry smile tugging at her lips. But thank you. You didn't have to risk your life for me. Most people would have kept driving. Michael shrugged, the weight of her gratitude both humbling and heavy. I couldn't just stand there. No one could have. Her gaze shifted to Emma, who was peering at her with unguarded curiosity. Her bunny now clutched to her chest. The woman's expression softened, her smile growing despite the visible pain it caused. She's adorable, she said, her voice warming. Your daughter? Yeah, Michael said, resting a hand on Emma's head. This is Emma. Emma stepped forward, her shyness melting under the woman's gentle attention. You're like a princess, she said, her voice brimming with awe. You came out of a fire, like in a story. The woman laughed, a soft, ragged sound that turned into a wince as she clutched her side, her face tightening. Princess Fire. Huh? She said, recovering with a small grin. I like that. It's better than anything I've got right now. Emma beamed, her gap-toothed smile lighting up the room, and Michael felt a flicker of warmth in his chest. Despite the trauma etched into the woman's features, there was a resilience there, a spark that refused to be snuffed out. It drew him in, though he couldn't quite name why. Over the next few days, Michael found himself returning to the hospital, drawn by a pull he didn't fully understand. His life was a carefully balanced machine, running a company, raising Emma, keeping the grief of his wife's death at bay. But this woman, this stranger with no name, had cracked that machine open. He brought Emma along when he could, partly because she begged to see Princess Fire and partly because he didn't trust anyone else to watch her. The police had been to the hospital asking questions about the fire, the chains, the stolen car, but their leads were thin, their faces grim. The woman had no ID, no family stepping forward, and no memory of her past beyond fleeting, disjointed images. Each visit revealed a little more of her. She was sharp, with a dry sense of humor that surfaced when Emma was around, coaxing laughs from the girl with silly stories about imaginary dragons. But when Emma wasn't there, she was quieter, her eyes often drifting to the window as if searching for something, or someone she couldn't name. Michael recognized the haunted look in her gaze, the same one he'd seen in the mirror after Sarah's death. It was the look of someone who'd lost too much, who carried wounds that didn't show. On the third day, he brought her a small notebook and a pen, thinking it might help her piece together the fragments of her memory. She'd stared at the gift, her fingers tracing the cover, and then looked at him with an expression he couldn't read. "Why do you keep coming back?" she asked, her voice soft but direct. "You've already done more than anyone would." He leaned back in the chair by her bed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe it's because Emma's taken to you. Maybe it's because I know what it's like to feel like the world's left you behind." She studied him, her dark eyes searching, and then nodded as if his answer was enough for now. When the hospital prepared to discharge her, the social worker, a kind but overworked woman named Miss Delgado, laid out the problem in stark terms. The woman had no memory, no resources, no place to go. Her medical bills were mounting, and without identification, she couldn't access social services. She'd be released with nothing but a hospital gown and a bus pass to nowhere. Michael listened, his jaw tight, as Ms. Delgado explained the options, none of which were viable. He found himself in her room later that day, standing by the window as she packed the few belongings she'd accumulated, a donated sweatshirt, the notebook he'd given her, a pair of sneakers from the hospital's charity bin. She moved carefully, her burns still tender, her movements deliberate. "You don't have to go to a shelter," he said, the words spilling out before he could second-guess them. "You can stay with us, just until you're back on your feet." She froze, her hands clutching the sweatshirt, and turned to face him. Her eyes were wide, wary, as if she expected the offer to come with strings. "Why would you do that?" she asked, her voice low. "You don't even know me. I could be anyone." "I know you've been through hell," he said, meeting her gaze. "I know what it's like to feel alone, to have nowhere to turn. And I know Emma's already decided you're her new best friend. She'd never forgive me if I let you go to some shelter." She laughed, a small, disbelieving sound, and shook her head. "You're insane, you know that. Inviting a stranger into your home," maybe he said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "But I'm pretty good at reading people. And you're not a stranger. Not anymore." She hesitated, her fingers tightening on the sweatshirt, and then nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Okay. But just for a little while, I don't want to be a burden." "You're not," he said, and meant it. Michael's home was a modern oasis in the suburbs, all glass and clean lines, with a sprawling backyard, where Emma loved to chase fireflies. It was a far cry from the chaos of that burning car from the hospital's sterile walls. The woman whom Emma insisted on calling Princess Fire settled into the guest room, a bright space with a view of the oak tree outside. She was quiet at first, moving through the house like a ghost, her footsteps soft, her presence careful, as if she feared taking up too much space. But Emma had other plans. The girl was a whirlwind of energy, dragging Princess Fire into her world with relentless enthusiasm. They spent hours sprawled on the living room floor, coloring pictures of unicorns and dragons, or curled up on the couch watching animated movies, Emma's laughter filling the house. One afternoon, Michael came home to find them in the kitchen, flour dusting their faces as they attempted to bake cookies. The results were lopsided and slightly charred, but Emma declared them the best ever, and Princess Fire's smile was brighter than he'd ever seen. He watched from the sidelines, struck by how natural it felt, how easily she fit into their lives. It was a dangerous feeling, one that stirred memories of Sarah, of the family he'd lost. But it was also undeniable, a quiet warmth that grew with every shared moment. Yet there were cracks in the surface. Princess Fire's fear lingered, surfacing in small, jagged moments. A slammed door made her flinch, her hands trembling as she steadied herself against the counter. A car backfiring in the street sent her retreating to her room, her face pale, her eyes distant. One evening, Michael found her frozen in the hallway, staring at the front door as if expecting it to burst open. "You okay?" he asked, keeping his voice gentle. She shook her head, her voice barely audible. "I don't know. It's like I'm waiting for something to go wrong, for someone to find me." He wanted to reassure her, to promise she was safe, but the questions gnawed at him. Who had done this to her? And were they still out there watching? He didn't push for answers, not yet, but he began locking the doors at night, checking the windows, his instincts on high alert. One night after Emma was asleep, Michael found her in the kitchen, standing by the sink, staring out the window into the dark. Her hands trembled as she clutched a mug of chamomile tea, the steam curling upward in delicate spirals. The moonlight caught the scars on her wrists, faint but visible, a reminder of the chains. "You okay?" he asked, leaning against the doorway, keeping his distance to give her space. She didn't turn around, her voice low and strained. "I keep seeing flashes." A man's voice, low and cruel, chains clanking. A room with no windows. "I don't know if it's real or if I'm losing my mind." Michael stepped closer, his boots soft against the hardwood floor. "You're not losing your mind," he said, his voice steady. "You've been through something awful, something most people wouldn't survive. Your brain's trying to make sense of it. It'll take time." She finally turned, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, the mug trembling in her hands. "Why are you so kind to me?" she asked, her voice breaking. "You don't owe me anything. You could have walked away that night, left me to the paramedics, but you're still here." "Why?" He paused, searching for the right words. "Maybe it's because I believe in second chances," he said, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Maybe it's because I see how Emma looks at you, like you're her hero. Or maybe it's because I know what it's like to lose everything and have to start over." She studied him, her gaze piercing, as if weighing his words against some invisible scale. Then she smiled, a real, unguarded smile that lit up her face, softening the sharp edges of her fear. "You're a good man, Michael Carter," she said, her voice quiet but certain. He felt a warmth spread through him, a spark of something he wasn't ready to name. "Get some rest," he said, nodding toward the hallway. "We've got a big day tomorrow. Emma's planning a princess tea party, and you're the guest of honor." She laughed, the sound light and genuine, and for a moment the shadows in her eyes lifted. Michael watched her walk down the hall, the mug still in her hands, and felt a shift deep within him. This wasn't just about helping a stranger anymore. It was about something deeper, something that scared him as much as it drew him in. The next morning, as Emma chattered about her tea party plans, Michael sat at the kitchen table, his coffee growing cold. He couldn't shake the image of those scars on her wrists, the fear in her voice. He needed answers, not just for her, but for the safety of his daughter, his home. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. A private investigator named Jack Ramsey, a former Marine with a knack for finding what others couldn't. "Jack," Michael said when the call connected, "I need your help. It's about a woman, a fire, and a past that's starting to feel like a threat." As he spoke, his eyes drifted to the living room, where Emma was carefully arranging plastic teacups on a blanket. Princess Fire sat beside her, laughing as Emma placed a paper crown on her head. The sight should have been comforting, but it only deepened the unease coiling in his gut. Whoever had chained her in that car was still out there, and Michael had a sinking feeling they weren't done with her yet. Weeks had slipped by since the night of the fire, and the woman who now went by Sophia, a name she'd chosen because it resonated with some faint, unplaceable memory, began to stitch herself back together. Her burns were healing, the raw, blistered skin on her arms and back, giving way to tender scars that itched under her loose cotton shirts. Her voice, once hoarse and fragile, grew steadier, carrying a quiet strength that surfaced in moments of laughter or defiance. She moved through Michael's suburban home with a cautious grace, her footsteps soft against the hardwood floors, as if she were still learning to trust the ground beneath her. Sophia and Emma, Michael's 6-year-old daughter, had become inseparable. Their bond a bright thread in the tapestry of the house, Michael often came home from his long days at Nexus Innovations to find them sprawled across the living room, surrounded by a chaos of crayons and half-finished drawings, or giggling in the kitchen as they shaped cookie dough into lopsided stars and hearts. One evening he paused in the doorway, his briefcase still in hand, watching as Sophia helped Emma drape a bedsheet over 2 chairs to form a blanket. Emma's curls bounced as she crawled inside, clutching her stuffed bunny, Mr. Flops, and declared it the best castle ever. Sophia's laughter, soft but genuine, filled the room, and for a moment the shadows that clung to her seemed to lift. It was a kind of domestic bliss Michael hadn't known since his wife Sarah died 3 years ago in a car accident that had shattered his world. The sight of Sophia and Emma together, their heads bent close as they whispered secrets inside their fort, stirred a warmth in his chest that was both comforting and terrifying. He'd spent so long guarding his heart, pouring himself into his company and his daughter, that this new feeling, this fragile, unnameable connection, felt like a betrayal of the life he'd rebuilt. Yet he couldn't look away, couldn't stop the quiet longing that grew each time Sophia smiled or caught his eye across the room. But Sophia's past was a shadow that lingered, a dark undercurrent beneath the surface of their makeshift family. Her memories came in fragments, jagged and incomplete, like shards of a broken mirror, reflecting only pain. They surfaced in quiet moments when she stared too long at the flickering flame of a candle, or when a sudden noise sent her heart racing, or in the dead of night when nightmares tore her from sleep. One such night, her screams pierced the silence of the house, raw and desperate, echoing down the hallway like a cry for salvation. Michael bolted from his bed, his bare feet cold against the floor as he rushed to the guest room. The door was ajar, and in the dim glow of a bedside lamp he found Sophia curled up on the bed, her knees drawn to her chest, her face buried in her hands. Her dark hair was tangled, clinging to her sweat-dampened cheeks, and her shoulders shook with silent sobs. The sight hit him like a punch, stirring a protective instinct that was both fierce and helpless. "Sophia, it's okay," he said, his voice low and steady as he sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to crowd her. "You're safe. You're here." She shook her head, her voice trembling, barely audible. "I saw him, the man who did this to me. He was laughing, standing over me, his face so clear. He said I'd never escape, that I'd always belong to him." Michael's stomach twisted, a cold dread pooling in his gut. The raw terror in her voice, the way her hands clenched as if still bound by chains, told him this was no ordinary nightmare. It was a memory clawing its way to the surface. He wanted to ask more, to demand the man's name, his face, anything that could lead to answers, but her fragility stopped him. Her eyes were wide, glassy with fear, and her breathing was shallow, as if she were teetering on the edge of panic. Instead, he stayed leaning back against the headboard and talking about anything to anchor her to the present. "Emma's got this new obsession with unicorns," he said, his voice deliberately light. "She's convinced they're real and that there's one hiding in the backyard. Keeps trying to sneak out with a carrot to lure it." Sophia's breathing slowed and she lifted her head, her fingers loosening their grip on her knees. "A carrot?" she asked, her voice still shaky but tinged with amusement. "Yeah," Michael said, a small smile tugging at his lips. "She read it in some book. Unicorns love carrots, apparently. Don't ask me how she plans to find a mythical creature in the suburbs." She let out a soft laugh, the sound fragile but real, and the tension in the room eased slightly. He kept talking about the terrible coffee at his office, the way his assistant kept misplacing his files, the time Emma tried to paint the dog with glitter glue, until her shoulders relaxed and her eyes grew heavy. She didn't speak again, but she didn't ask him to leave, and so he stayed watching over her until the first light of dawn crept through the curtains. The next morning, Michael sat at the kitchen table, his coffee untouched, his mind churning. Emma was in the living room, humming to herself as she colored, oblivious to the weight of the night. Sophia was still asleep. Her door closed, and Michael was grateful for the quiet. He needed to think, to act. The man in her nightmare wasn't a ghost. He was real. And the thought of him still out there, a threat to Sophia and maybe even Emma, set his nerves on edge. He picked up his phone and dialed Jack Ramsey, the private investigator he'd hired shortly after bringing Sophia home. Jack was a former Marine, gruff and no-nonsense, with a knack for uncovering truths others missed. He'd been digging into the car fire, chasing leads the police had overlooked, and Michael hoped he had something concrete. "Jack," Michael said, when the call connected, keeping his voice low. "Tell me you've got something on the fire on her." Jack's voice was gravelly, tinged with the weariness of someone who'd seen too much. "I was about to call you. It's not good, Mike. The sedan was stolen. VIN filed off, no prints. Clean, professional job. The chains, though. Custom-made high-grade steel. The kind used in high-security ops, think black site prisons, not your average hardware store. This wasn't random. Someone wanted her dead, and they wanted it to hurt. Michael's grip tightened on the phone, his knuckles whitening. Any leads on who? There's more, Jack said, his tone darkening. I cross-referenced missing persons reports focused on women in their 20s and 30s last seen in the Southwest. Found a pattern stretching back 5 years. Women disappearing. Some turn up dead, burned, or worse. Others just vanish. The few who survived mentioned a man named Darius. No. Last name. No clear description. Just whispers of a guy who runs a trafficking ring across state lines. Cops have nothing solid on him, but the chatter's consistent. Michael's blood ran cold. You think Sophia was one of his victims? Chains fire isolated highway. It's his signature, Jack said. He doesn't just kill his victims. He makes them suffer. Sends a message. If she's one of his, she's lucky to be alive. But she's not safe. Guys like Darius don't let loose ends walk away. Michael ended the call, his mind racing a storm of fear and determination. He didn't tell Sophia about Darius, not yet. She was still fragile, her recovery a delicate balance, and the last thing she needed was to be plunged back into terror. But he couldn't ignore the danger, couldn't pretend the threat wasn't real. If Darius was out there, he might come for her again, and Michael wasn't about to let that happen. Over the next few days, Sophia's memories grew clearer, each one a painful step toward the truth. She began writing in the notebook Michael had given her, filling pages with fragmented images. A dusty street in a small Nevada town, the smell of stale beer and cigarette smoke, the cold bite of chains against her wrists. She remembered being taken, her screams muffled by a cloth pressed to her face. Her body dragged into a van. She'd been sold to a man who called himself her husband, a cruel figure with a voice like ice, who kept her chained in a basement for months. His punishments as unpredictable as they were brutal. She'd escaped once, slipping through a cracked window in a moment of desperation, only to be recaptured days later. Her body battered, her spirit nearly broken. The car fire, she realized, was meant to be her final punishment, a death designed to erase her from existence. I was supposed to die, she told Michael one evening, her voice hollow, her eyes fixed on the horizon. They were sitting on the back porch, the night air cool and quiet, the stars sharp against the velvet sky. Emma was asleep inside her latest unicorn drawing taped to the fridge, and the house felt like a fragile sanctuary. He wanted to make sure no one would find me, not even a body to bury. Michael reached for her hand, his touch steady, grounding. Her fingers were cold, trembling slightly, but she didn't pull away. He didn't win, he said, his voice firm. You're here. You're alive, and you're stronger than he ever could have imagined. Sophia's eyes met his, and for a moment the weight of her past seemed to lift her gaze, softening under the warmth of his words. I don't know how to thank you, Michael, she said, her voice catching. For giving me a place to heal, for letting me be part of Emma's world. For seeing me when I barely see myself. You don't have to thank me, he said, his thumb brushing lightly over her knuckles. Just keep fighting. You're not alone in this anymore. She nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek, and they sat in silence, the night wrapping around them like a shield. But the fight was far from over, and Michael knew it. The next morning he called a security company, arranging for a team to monitor the house discreetly. He didn't tell Sophia, not wanting to alarm her, but the thought of Darius out there, a predator circling, kept him awake at night. He began working closely with Jack, poring over the PI's reports, chasing leads that led to dead ends or shadowy figures who vanished before they could be questioned. The more they uncovered, the darker the picture became. Darius wasn't just a criminal. He was a ghost, operating through a network of enforcers, shell companies, and encrypted communications. His trafficking ring spanned multiple states, moving women like commodities, their lives reduced to transactions in a ledger. He was meticulous, leaving no trace, no face for the police to hunt. The few survivors who'd spoken his name had done so in whispers, their fear palpable even through Jack's grainy audio recordings. Darius was untouchable, or so he thought. Michael kept this from Sophia, but her own memories were closing the gap. She began to recall details she hadn't written down: the layout of a compound in the desert, the sound of a specific engine, the smell of gun oil on the man who'd chained her. She shared these with Michael in quiet moments, her voice steady, but her hands shaking as if speaking. The memories aloud gave them power. He listened, jotting notes, passing them to Jack, each piece a step closer to Darius. One night as Michael sat in his home office, the glow of his laptop casting shadows across the room, Sophia knocked on the door. She stood in the doorway, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her face pale but resolute. Her hair was pulled back, revealing the faint scar above her eyebrow, a mark from her escape attempt. "I remembered something else," she said, her voice low as if afraid the words might summon the man they named Darius. Michael's heart sank, a cold weight settling in his chest. He'd hoped to shield her from this truth, to keep her safe from the monster in her past until they had a plan. But there was no hiding it now. He gestured to the chair across from his desk, and she sat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. He took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "Jack, the PI found a pattern. Women disappearing, some dead, some gone. They're linked to a trafficking ring, and the man behind it is named Darius. The fire, the chains, it's how he operates. He's careful, slippery, but we're closing in." Sophia listened, her face pale, her eyes fixed on the desk, as if grounding herself in its solid presence. When he finished, she was silent for a long moment, her breathing slow and deliberate. Then she looked up, her gaze fierce despite the fear in her eyes. "I want to help," she said, her voice steady now. "If he's still out there, he's hurting other women, other girls. I can't just sit here pretending it's over. I know things, places, faces, things. I haven't told you yet. I want to stop him." Michael admired her courage, the fire in her that refused to be extinguished. But fear gripped him, fear of losing her, of putting her in Darius's crosshairs. He leaned forward, his hands clasped on the desk. "Sophia, you've been through enough. This guy, he's dangerous more than you can imagine. I don't want you anywhere near him." She shook her head, her jaw set. "I'm already in this, Michael. He took everything from me. My name, my freedom, my life. I won't let him take anyone else's. And I'm not asking for permission. I'm telling you I'm in." Her words hung between them, unyielding, and Michael felt a surge of respect tinged with dread. He nodded, his voice quiet. "Okay, we'll do this together. But we have to be careful every step, for you, for Emma, for all of us." She nodded, a small determined smile breaking through her fear. Together. As they began to plan, mapping out Sophia's memories against Jack's intel, Michael realized something had shifted between them. It wasn't just about protecting Sophia anymore, about keeping her safe from a past that haunted her. It was about building something new, something worth fighting for, a future where she could be whole, where they could be more than survivors. The thought scared him, but it also gave him purpose, a reason to face the darkness ahead. They spent late nights in the office, Sophia sketching layouts of the desert compound, Michael cross-referencing them with satellite images Jack provided. They traced Darius's network, identifying safe houses, drop points, and enforcers whose names surfaced in hushed conversations. Each discovery brought them closer to a confrontation Michael both dreaded and craved. Sophia's courage grew with every memory she reclaimed, but so did her fear. A quiet tremor that surfaced when she thought no one was watching. One evening, as they sat over a pile of notes, Sophia paused, her pen hovering over the paper. "What if we find him?" she asked, her voice soft. "What if we stop him, and I'm still broken?" Michael looked at her, his heart aching at the vulnerability in her eyes. "You're not broken," he said. "You're rebuilding piece by piece, and you're not doing it alone." She smiled, a small grateful curve of her lips. And in that moment, Michael knew he'd do whatever it took to keep her safe, to give her the chance to heal. Darius was a shadow, but they were light, and together they would face him no matter the cost. The next few weeks were a high-stakes chess game. Michael and Sophia worked with the PI and a small team to dismantle Darius's network. They hacked encrypted communications, tracked shipments, and identified key players. It was dangerous, and every move brought them closer to a man who thrived on fear. Sophia's memories were a goldmine despite their pain. She recalled locations, aliases, even the layout of Darius's main compound. Her determination to free other women drove her, and Michael marveled at her strength. He struggled to balance his roles as father and fighter. To keep Emma safe, he sent her to stay with his sister during the investigation's most intense phases. But the fear that Darius might target his family lingered. That fear became reality one stormy night. Michael and Sophia were in his office, reviewing surveillance footage, when the security system screamed. Cameras showed 3 armed men approaching, their faces masked. "Safe room now," Michael said, grabbing a handgun from his desk. Sophia shook her head. "I'm not hiding. Not anymore." Before he could argue, the front door exploded inward. The men stormed in, weapons raised. Michael fired, dropping one, but the others returned fire, forcing them behind the couch. Bullets shredded the walls, glass shattering around them. "Garage," Michael whispered. "There's a car ready." Sophia nodded, her eyes fierce. They crawled through the chaos, dodging gunfire, and reached the garage. Michael started the SUV and they sped into the night, the attackers in pursuit. The chase was a blur of rain-slicked streets and screeching tires. Michael's focus was razor-sharp, but fear for Sophia gripped him. She clung to the seat, her face set with resolve. "We can't keep running," she said. "We have to end this." He knew she was right. He veered onto a side road leading to an abandoned warehouse, one of Darius's hideouts. If they were going to face him, it would be on their terms. The warehouse was a cavern of shadows lit by flickering lights. Michael and Sophia moved cautiously, weapons drawn. Darius was waiting, his tall figure flanked by two enforcers. His smile was cold, predatory. "You're persistent," he said, his voice smooth. "I'll give you that." Sophia stepped forward, her voice steady. "You took everything from me, but I'm not your victim anymore." Darius laughed, but Michael lunged, tackling an enforcer. The warehouse erupted, gunfire, shouts, metal clanging. Sophia fought fiercely, disarming the second enforcer and turning his weapon on Darius. In the end, Sophia brought Darius down a shot to his leg, sending him to the ground. The police, tipped off by the PI, arrived and took him into custody. His empire began to crumble. The aftermath was chaotic, police reports, media frenzy, and quiet healing. Darius's arrest freed dozens of women, and Sophia became a symbol of resilience, though she avoided the spotlight. She and Michael grew closer, their bond forged in fire. One sunny afternoon in a small garden, they exchanged vows. Emma, now 8, was the flower girl, beaming with pride. "I didn't just find you in that car," Michael said, his voice thick. "I found the person I want to spend my life with." Sophia smiled, her eyes shining. "And I found a home." Emma tugged at Sophia's dress. "Princess Fire, you're my mom now, right?" "Forever, kiddo," Sophia said, pulling her into a hug. In life, we often face unimaginable hardships. But the story of Michael and Sophia reminds us of the power of love, resilience, and the importance of never giving up even when the past weighs heavy on our shoulders. One of the key messages here is that true strength lies not in avoiding pain, but in choosing to rise above it. Michael's willingness to protect Sophia and Sophia's courage to embrace her healing journey reflect the transformative power of love and support. It teaches us that sometimes the greatest act of love is simply being there for others, offering a safe space to heal, and allowing them the time they need to rediscover themselves. Additionally, the story emphasizes the importance of facing our fears and confronting difficult truths, as doing so can lead to freedom and growth. Just as Sophia overcame her past and embraced a new future, we too can break free from our limitations and step into a brighter tomorrow, as long as we remain open to love, forgiveness, and the strength that lies within us all.